Hi friends, welcome to So Darn Fun. I'm Carrie, and this is a channel that focuses on quality clothing alterations, pattern reviews, and useful sewing how-tos. Today I'm showing how I take up the shoulders on this dress, lower the sleeve hole, put the sleeve back in, and all the while I have to remove and reapply these appliques. So if you have a project coming up that has any of these issues, you might want to keep watching. This shoulder seam needs to be taken in a massive amount, like 4.5 inches, and the sleeve needs to be narrowed a bit. So there will be a discrepancy in the size of the armhole versus the sleeve, with the sleeve being larger. So I'll have to lower the armhole to accommodate the new sleeve size. But before I do any of the actual taking in, the sleeve needs to come out. If you don't need instruction on the sleeve removal or the shoulder take-up, then you can skip ahead to timestamp 10 minutes and 30 seconds to get directly to the how to lower the armhole portion of this video. So first I'm working on removing the sleeve. I noticed that that sleeve is actually sewn in with a French seam, not a binding. I find the clear nylon thread and just slide it out, which is actually pretty easy on this netting. I also noticed that there are appliques all over this dress, and some of those appliques are sewn on through that armhole seam, and so I need to loosen some of those appliques too. But once you grab one of those threads, it just sort of squeaks out and makes it quite easy to remove the stitching. There's an applique right there that needs to be released. So I've got to work kind of on two things at once. One is removing the appliques that are spanning that seam, and also the seam thread. So the reason I'm showing all this footage is to show that this sort of tedious work is normal for this kind of an alteration, that this is the approach that I take to get a quality alteration. All the things that I remove, I can also replace. And I just take my time in taking all this stuff apart. I need to be sure that I separate enough of the appliques to give me room to put this under my sewing machine and the presser foot so that it clears all that and I don't run into any of these beautiful plastic glued on gems, etc. So I'm just working on loosening these appliques so I can remove the sleeve. Just checking to make sure that all of these appliques have been loosened. Then I can work on actually pulling out the thread that holds that French seam together. I only have one more row of stitching to pull out. As you can see, it just sort of slides out. And now the sleeve is coming out finally. There's a couple little appliques I missed that are kind of holding it all together. So I just loose those. And once those are done, I have got the sleeve pulled out. There it is. And you can see where the pin is. I need to take in that much on the sleeve, quite a bit less than I do on the shoulder. Since I need to take it up between these 2 points where the pins are, there's all those appliques. I need to remove those appliques. So I just got to find these little skinny see-through threads and pull them, and they just kind of slide out. So I'll get back when I've got that done. So here's what these appliques look like. They're just in sheets. Sometimes they're like individual flowers. You have to pluck off several different appliques that are layered on each other, but these are just like big sheets. And I know that I need to take in this shoulder 2 1/4 here, 2 1/4 here. And let's see how this is put together. This shoulder seam is sewn with a French seam, and then there is a binding on the neck edge portion. So I'm gonna loose that binding, which is made out of self-netting, which is kind of a nice little finish. I'm working on removing the top stitching that's holding that binding down. And making sure that my appliques are pulled away far enough from that seam. Here's what the binding looks like. It's still sewn on, it's just the top stitching's been lifted. It's sewn on and then flipped under. I guess that adds some stability, you know, a little bit of structure to that neckline. So I'm debating doing a shortcut. I'm just taking it in like this because it's covered with appliques. But of course, I do not do the shortcut. I replicate the same treatment for this shoulder as was in the original. So you could do the shortcut because the appliques covered all, but that's not what I opted to do on this. Once that neck binding is released, we can get a good look at that little French seam on the shoulder and figure out what my measurements need to be for reproducing that French seam. As I'm looking at the original seam of this shoulder, I'm determining where my final seam needs to be. Once I've determined that, I'm going to subtract 1/2 inch from that for my first seam. Put the wrong sides together to make my first stitching. First, I'll pin where my stitching line is going to be because I can't really mark on this netting. So using pins is a good alternative for me. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is trim this really close, less than 1/4 inch, just under. Because now what I'm going to do is turn it. Now I'm putting right sides together. Can you see the seam line in between there? We're just going to encase it in there. Lovely French seam. Okay, so here's the outside and our French seam on the inside. Before I finally get to the binding, I see some more appliques that I need to loosen. So let me free those up, and then I'm going to pin the binding on. This binding is just overlapped with each other to finish off the ends. Cut the long piece off there, and I'm just overlapping the ends, just the raw ends. You might be able to see the overlapping in this segment here, and then just sew it on. Once it's sewn on, it'll be folded back and top stitched. I think you probably get a better idea of what this looks like before I even plucked it off when I was showing earlier in the video how that is attached. And that finishes off the binding to the neck edge that we've shortened through the shoulder area. I kind of like the binding. It adds some stability, I think, some strength, being that it's just all netting. Now let's take in that sleeve. Measuring how much I need to take the sleeve in, and I'm not going to pluck out the appliques on this one because actually the original sleeve has the appliques just kind of sewn into that seam. It's under the arm anyway, doesn't show. So what I did was I plucked out the seam lines, and then once again I measured what my desired seam line will be minus 1/2 inch, and then put pins on what that seam line will be. So I stitch that seam line, and then just like I showed in other parts of this video, we will trim it very close to the seam line. I've got to sometimes pluck off these little gems that get in the way. Thankfully they're just glued on. I can just pull it off and it comes off pretty easily. Using my measuring tool to make sure that I get the proper seam line here at the edge. Once again, I'm trimming that less than 1/4 of an inch. Now that we've got the right sides of our sleeves put together, we can stitch that with a 1/4 inch seam. You can pin it or just freehand it. I just freehanded it here. Trimming the threads and having a final look at what that beautiful underarm French seam looks like before we move on to the next portion of lowering that armhole. Now there are 2 sleeves layered here. The top one is untouched and the bottom one is the one I just took in. You can see the difference in shape around the underarm, which we'll need to reshape so that the proper fit is restored. 2 sleeves are folded in half here, and you can see the difference in shape. We really need to get our new sleeve shaped like the older one so that the fitting will be correct around the underarm. So we just trim it off like that. Upon measuring the armhole versus the sleeve, we have a discrepancy because we took like 4 inches up from the shoulder and we took the sleeve in 3 inches. So of course they're not going to match up anymore. So upon measuring the armhole and the sleeve, and you can do this with a regular measuring tape or with a French curve, I have come up with an inch discrepancy. My armhole needs to be an inch bigger. So what I'm going to do is take my French curve here and drop the armhole 1 inch. So I can see where 1 inch is here, that far. And then redraw the armhole. But I've got some appliques. I'm gonna lift those appliques up first and then we'll cut out the armhole a little bit bigger. And because I want to preserve the original shape of this armhole, I'm going to trace just the curve here, the armpit curve, and it's hard to make the dress lay flat because of all the, you know, the lumps and bumps in it, but we'll just do the best that we can. I've got the layers, the front and back, pinned together just to keep them identical. And I'm going to start here right at the armpit and just trace it up. And this is probably about all I need to know is this shaping right here. It's not too much shaping, but it's enough. And I'm going to make that to be my template. So I'm just going to cut this out. This is going to lay right here. And I need to put this edge an inch below where it currently is. So it would be right there. And then we're going to blend it in up there. All right. Catching on something I cannot tell. Let's come from this way. All right, you appliques. Oh yeah, probably save myself time if I just pluck them off. Oh my goodness. It's like this whole dress is made out of netting, just netting. And then they slathered appliques all over. Quite seriously, all over. There we go. Ta-da! All right. Now I can set that sleeve in. All right, keeping mindful to keep these appliques peeled back. It's one of the reasons I'm not going to do the French seam because it's just going to be too messy with all these appliques. So let's go to the machine and get this sleeve sewn in. The sleeve has already been pinned in, being sure to keep the underarm a 1-to-1 in measurement. So if any easing has to be done, make sure that it's on the top portion of the sleeve. Okay, here's our new sleeve. Now I'm just going to finish it off with a serger on the inside and then figure out what to do with these appliques here, and then sew down the appliques that go over the shoulder, and then for the other sleeve. And then that one will be done. So I'm showing in this segment how I sewed down the appliques. I have a sewing machine that has a special foot for free motion embroidery and such. So I've lowered the feed dogs, and it takes some practice to learn how to do this, but I am free motion applying those appliques back onto the dress. You can do it with regular foot, just be very careful, or of course by hand. And here we have our before and after pictures. On the left, of course, you can see the pinned up shoulders before all the work is done, and after, how nice and neat the appliques and the sleeves are. And as always, thank you for joining me today on So Darn Fun. I really do appreciate your subscribes, your likes, your comments. They all help with the algorithm to push my videos out there so that more viewers can see the content that I have to offer. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video, and have a great day.